Mickey Mouse. One of the first major recognized cartoon characters, the figurehead of Disney since 1928, and a franchise that even after all of these years is the face of Disney and a source of childlike wonder, wholesomeness, and family values that anyone of any age can enjoy.
Fuck that, let's make some dick jokes.
Nostalgic reviews.
Mickey's Speedway USA is an anomaly if there ever was one, a Mickey Mouse racing game made by Rareware. That's like 6 oddities in one sentence. Though to be fair, there are bigger oddities in video games, like Power Armored Physicist Goes Postal, Animal Cruelty-Based Economy, or Ghost Future Past Soccer Player Being Dreamt by Our Dad Who's Also a Giant Whale, or whatever the fuck was going on in Final Fantasy X. In any case, this was one of the last N64 games Rare made, and also one of the last Nintendo games Rare made before being assimilated into Microsoft. It came out on November 13th, 2000, to middlingly positive reviews, criticized for basically being a watered-down version of any number of other racers, which I think isn't giving the game enough credit. The biggest takeaway from this game at the outset is that Mickey's Speedway USA was built on the same engine as Diddy Kong Racing, and right there is the assurance that this game is going to at least be alright, because Diddy Kong Racing, while it's not my favorite racer of all time, it's a really solid racing game that outclasses most contemporary games of the 5th generation. But then again, we're also dealing with Rareware. I'll be entirely honest with you, I'm not really a big fan of Rareware. I've played almost every Rareware game, and too many times I've played a game that people look back fondly on and will tell me is a bona fide classic, to which I play and react with a profound meh. I'm not going to call Rareware overrated, but I certainly don't see what a lot of other people see when they say that Rare is one of the greatest developers of all time, but it's not over until it's over, and we've barely even started. Among the Rareware catalog, this is one that I don't really hear about too often from anybody. Mickey Speedway USA could be that hidden gem that nobody talks about, or it could be the Rareware game that nobody talks about for a good reason.
So let's take a look at Mickey Speedway USA and see if it holds up on its own without nostalgia, or better yet, see if it passes the nostalgia test. However, because this is clearly a game targeted at a very young demographic, I now have to get into the mental mindset of a 5-year-old. This is worse than Band Camp!
So surprisingly, this game has a plot. I'm just as shocked as you are about that. It's not very good, but once again, it's a case of me commending a game for actually doing something that most of its contemporaries didn't do. The story is, Pluto is kidnapped by the Weasels for his diamond collar. Why they couldn't just take the collar, I don't know. Maybe they wanted a ransom. This prompts Mickey to call everybody in to help him find Pluto, and they all get into race cars and drive off. Then somewhere along the line, this becomes a race. How? I don't know. Maybe it's a race to get Pluto the fastest, and everybody has an ulterior motive. It's not really mentioned how this translates into everybody racing, but a framing device is a framing device. Plus, this may be a rich phrase coming out of my mouth, but it doesn't really matter all that much. This is one of the cases where, as a story, it's so thin on the ground and the subject matter is so juvenile that analyzing it is pretty pointless, because it's essentially as good as it needed to be. That's not to say that Mickey Mouse is juvenile. Like I said, by and large, it's something that anybody could hypothetically enjoy, but I'd say Mickey Mouse comes in a few distinct flavors. You got fun for the whole family, you got media targeted at very young kids, you have the more mature things like the time he spent a whole comic trying to commit suicide.
And the fucked up thing is, it's not even done in a tongue-in-cheek manner. It's literally just an entire comic of Mickey Mouse trying and failing to kill himself. Like, any joke I could make right now would be in incredibly poor taste, even by my standards.
And also you have whatever the hell Kingdom Hearts is. Wow, I'm really picking on Squeenix today. I'd say this is a case of targeted at young kids, so why am I even playing it? Well, video games are unique amongst most media in that as long as it's well made enough and balanced for challenge, it's something that anyone could enjoy. I'm a connoisseur of kart racers, both good and bad, and there's definitely more to Mickey Speedway USA than meets the eye under the surface. I'll say that the ending is so terrible that I'm not even gonna bother mentioning it, but basically, when it comes to story here, it's as good as it needs to be. It doesn't really frame the action in a way that makes sense, but from a practical standpoint, it does the job. It's really the racing that matters most of all, and you may be surprised to find out that the racing is genuinely some of the best on the N64. It's a basic setup as far as kart racers go. A to accelerate, B to brake, R to power slide, and Z to use weapons. You're given an assortment of weapons, and what I like about the weapons is that in the manual, they're given a charming, overcomplicated name for such mundane objects. Like, it's not just a baseball, it's an incrediflated baseball chucker.
Well, I'm gonna now ingest liquid from my dihydrogen monoxide containment unit.
While as far as weapons go, they hit all the same beats. You got your protection, you got your ranged weapon, you got your auto-tracking weapon, your fuck you weapon for the person in last place, and so on. It's a pretty clever but fairly standard array of weapons. Plus, I can't tell if these are made up for the game or if they're something from a TV show or whatever, like how Mario Kart uses its items for racing weapons. Beyond that, you race around these tracks and try and win, obviously. And there's a point system that determines your overall standing at the end of a tournament. Winning will unlock higher difficulty as well as rewards such as cheats. Plus, you have a time trial mode. So far, so generic. So what is it about this game that makes it anything more than just another racer? What does it for me is that it doesn't do anything particularly new, but it does everything it does really well. Say does one more time, motherfucker. Mechanically, this game is slick as butter. It doesn't seem to have any drift boost mechanic, which does make it feel a bit shallow, but the controls feel really responsive. I feel 100% in control of every race, and I know exactly how my inputs will impact my movements. The transitions between jumps, driving, and sliding feel so smooth it's practically seamless, and that's practically unheard of for an N64 game. I love the power sliding especially. Its only real use is to take sharper turns, but it feels so good to power slide, and it's rewarding to time the slides right to minimize lap time or take advantage of shortcuts and whatnot. It has an impressive momentum system too. These levels have some hills and valleys to them, so you'll find yourself going at crazy high speeds downhill. It's a small thing, but it does make this game feel more real if anything else, and I think racing games are probably the genre where realism is the most important because you want to feel the weight of the vehicle. Otherwise, it's an impressive engine for the time, probably more advanced than most racing engines by 2000, at least for what it was. You see, it's the type of racing physics that feels weighty and real enough to add to the game without being so real that it detracts from the experience. A reason I can't get into many racing games these days is because they feel so real that I don't feel in control, and one mistake will have me hurtle through the air like a maniac, or I'll take a turn and then go too far, then perpetually overcompensate. Point is, I like to feel in control, and I know some people like their hyper-realistic physics and crashes, but for me, having assurance of knowing where I'm going is slightly more important than hyper-realism. For most, an ideal racing game would be some combination of controls, physics, and speed. This game has the controls, it has the physics, but it doesn't quite have the speed. This isn't a very fast racer unless you're going downhill. In fact, at times it can be downright slow. Of course, you have different racers with different stats for turning speed and acceleration, which is fairly standard, but the difference between racers aren't so drastic that the game really feels different with any of the characters, which I guess is a bit of a blessing and a curse because you don't have Tiny Tiger levels of you can't continue moments, but it also means that all of the characters feel generally the same, which kind of defeats the purpose of even having them in the first place, other than hearing situational quips, but even that's a bit of a bother. I don't hate the quips between racers as a concept because something like Crash Team Racing.
Wow, I went a whole insert time in post without mentioning Crash Team Racing.
In something like Crash Team Racing, the mid-race quips added something, but they were done in moderation. This game's problem is that the quips are way too frequent. It just gets annoying very quick. There are so many quips that I can barely hear the music, so the sound design is annoying, and the music is... kinda hit and miss. It has some really good tracks. But then it has some pretty mediocre tracks. While I wouldn't call any of these bad music tracks, they're bad racing tracks. Oh god, that was a pun, I'm sorry. Racing has a sort of implication of excitement, and when I describe music as whimsical or cheery, that doesn't really fit the atmosphere. In fact, it goes against the grain a bit. The music sounded like it was made primarily from a synth keyboard, and while it's possible to make music from one that's exciting, as is the case with a few of these tracks, it's a little harder to do that than with, say, a standard band setup. It sounded like it was appropriate music for a Mickey Mouse game, but more of a 3D platformer, whereas I would have appreciated more intensity in my racing. I'm not asking for them to have heavy metal blasting in a Mickey Mouse game, fucking awesome as that would have been. I'm just asking for more intensity and excitement in my composition. Then again, there might have been more intensity in the gameplay if the level design was better. It's a bit of a blanket statement to say that the level design is dull, but once again, it's very hit and miss. It starts out pretty straightforward, as is pretty standard, but it doesn't really evolve much beyond that. There was some creativity on display, but it doesn't really get to the level of a Mario Kart or a Crash Team Racing. The levels are mostly flat and straightforward. Sure, the jumps, twists, turns, and hills are in abundance, however, that just makes makes it a twisty ribbon that bends back into itself, but there really aren't any places that the ribbon splits off. What I mean is that the mechanics are too simple to really have any expansion for experienced players to work off of, a la the power slide boost, nor are there many shortcuts to take advantage of either. There are a few, but it's mostly just straightforward racing. There are a few standout moments, like how you have to time a power slide perfectly to get around a corner for the shortest route without hitting the walls, or you have to go a different route depending on which fork you take in Alaska or New York, but it doesn't really get much more complex than that. There are plenty of races and plenty of varied looking locations, but they can't help but all blur together for the most part. But there are a few standout tracks, like the aforementioned Alaska, the Grand Canyon, or Philadelphia, but otherwise the level design is pretty dull. I'd say it balances out though, because the design is at worst mediocre and at best pretty good, but even if the level design is kinda meh, I still find these tracks fun enough to navigate with the smooth mechanics, and the game is still a very stimulating challenge regardless of the level design. It's funny because I did read some of the reviews from Metacritic, and a common complaint is that this game is too easy, and my response is, what fucking game are you playing? Yeah, this game is easy on the lowest difficulty setting, but even on medium difficulty, the later races can get very hairy. I'll admit, I struggled to win at all from like around the second half onward on medium, so it makes me question how much these reviewers actually played of the game. Probably around like an hour to get through every track on easy. Really goes to show you the state of games journalism from around the late 90s, early 2000s. One thing I'll happily give this game a tongue bath for is a feature that so many other games lack: single-player battle arena. This is one thing that elevates this game past most kart racers of the time. Battle mode is a big characteristic of these types of games, but nobody ever seems to include them for single player, even though all you need are bots. But nope, for almost every racer I've ever played, battle mode is restricted to multiplayer only, which really fucks with friendless bungholes like me. It's not the greatest battle mode of all time, the weapons aren't optimal, and aside from the ship level, the level design isn't particularly good. In addition, it's also very hard. I have yet to win a single one of these battle games, but once again, even if this was the worst battle mode in history, I'd still have to praise this game for it, just for allowing it in single player, because virtually no other game does this. But for what it's worth, it's a decent enough minigame even on its own merits, it's more fresh content, and it adds a little bit of replay value, if only because I want to keep coming back to try and see if I can win just one game. They even have cheats for you to unlock. Of course, the early ones aren't super impressive, but they get better as you go on, such as tiny racers, but you start out at the bottom, such as with Rainbow Goo.
There's a joke in there somewhere.
The goo really is an anomaly in this game. I seriously have no idea what it's supposed to do with anything, but hey, they're fun to use. As a whole, the weapons are pretty standard, but they do have some impact to them. I especially like the baseballs because they really packed a wallop when they exploded. Plus, if you didn't hit anyone with them, they stayed on the track until somebody hit it. But I also like the homing car, or the micro-wheeled trace chaser, as smooth in the mouth as a sandpaper cock, which is your standard auto-tracking weapon. I think my favorite was the soda can because weirdly, the speed boost is literally a can of pop. I can't get enough of that. But then there's the tokens. Tokens are also weird. First of all, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be pronounced or OOMPH because it does have MPH in there, or miles per hour. The use of these tokens allegedly are to boost your top speed, with 10 being the ceiling. Once again, I didn't notice any major difference between 1 and 10, but it was sequential, so maybe that's the point. And if you do examine it side by side, there is a distinct speed difference, so they're worth something, but it's not something to go out of your way to get, so it can be safely disregarded, but they didn't take anything away, so it's fine. I think this game by N64 standards looks great. Once again, they managed full 3D in every aspect while keeping the game running well performance-wise, unlike another Mario Kart I could mention. Game I could mention. The models and animation are smooth. They translated each of these traditionally 2D characters to 3D seamlessly. I feel like they may have billboarded the wheels like CTR did, but I can't tell, so it looks great regardless. There definitely is a clever use of billboarding, so they didn't have to render 1,000 things on screen, but it looks good and calls for no further comment. The environments are damn pretty and capture the feeling that each of these parts of the United States carry. I especially liked Philadelphia, which really did replicate the look and feel of a shipping yard rather impressively accurately. Plus, there's an impressive amount of detail in these environments that I didn't even notice for a while, like Liberty Mickey. There's really not much more to say other than, as far as N64 games go, this is one of the best looking racers out there.
I beg your pardon?
Wow, it's amazing that for a company that's so protective of anything even slightly harming their brand, they let what unmistakably sounds like Mickey Mouse saying "fuck yeah" slip through the cracks. Like seriously, Disney is very adamant about that. It's been a long-standing rumor that on Walt Disney's 35th birthday, some of his animators as a joke made a short animation of Mickey and Minnie well, doing it. There's conflicting reports as to what Disney's reaction was. One story read that his reaction was jovial and he jokingly asked who did it. Another story read that he flipped out and demanded the prince be burned. Both stories ended the same though, with all involved being fired. But then again, this entire story could just be a hoax. Either way, it just goes to show you the level of a death grip that the Disney Corporation has on this franchise and how even in private, they don't tolerate anything even slightly edgy.
If only Sega would have thought of that.
And that's when TGX fucking died. There.
Mickey's Speedway USA isn't revolutionary. It doesn't do anything new or wildly out of the box. It's just a simple, straightforward racing game with solid mechanics and smooth gameplay. Shallow as it may be, it's simple, but simple done right. And while I prefer something that's a little bit more ambitious, even if it's not 100% successful, there's no knocking a solid but safe game, especially one that's handling such a touchy property. Mickey's Speedway USA is better than it has any right to be. Not the most interesting thing in the world or the thing with the most to talk about, but it does what it does really well. It surprised me because I bought it on a whim, and if only for sheer quality, if not depth, it's probably at least the second best kart racer on the system.
Yeah, Mario Kart 64 really is better.
You must be new here. So, does Mickey's Speedway USA pass the nostalgia test? Well, aside from having a very odd name that's very hard to enunciate, yes. While I'm not a particularly big fan of Rareware, they certainly did a very solid job with this one. Maybe not a home run per se, more of a solid double.
You don't like Mario Kart 64, your opinion is invalid!
This video was brought to you in part by my lovely patrons. I thank you for your continued support. If you want to become a patron for TGX, the link is in the description.
And that's all I need to do, hopefully.